So it's been a little while since I've had an opportunity to do one of these. I started a new job and then I turned around and left that new job. And if I were to get into the details of all of that, it would go on and on forever. But I'm not too worried about it. I have another interview already lined up for tomorrow morning. Um, it's one of the benefits of being kind of in the IT industry. It's pretty easy to go from place to place. It's not a habit you want to get into. Of course, I stayed at this last place a couple of years, but it's also an industry where you don't park your car at the same parking spot for 20 years either. It's kind of an interesting industry to be in. But anyway, uh, I still have a lot of notes written down for the 1984 thing that I had started on the last time I did one of these. But I also I'm not really completed with that yet. I kind of wanted that one to be really well done in terms of being cohesive and straight to the point, staying on topic. There's a whole lot of stuff that I can touch upon with it that I don't want to just kind of wing it like I do with everything else on here. Most of the time, I just wing these. But I noticed something I was looking up not too long ago, and was browsing around about it, and there seems to be a school of thought for those who don't believe that the term, well, I don't like using the term alcoholism actually because it's not a real thing in my opinion, and it's not a disease. At least not the way AA defines it, which is some spiritual, some spiritual, emotional, some spiritual, mental thing that only a higher power can remove. I mean, that is the AA definition of a disease. It's not a disease in the normal circumstances of like a mental illness or a physical illness. It's a spiritual thing that's vague and doesn't really sum up everything because the treatment for it is a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo and moral bullshit. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, I've noticed there are the people who say that it's 100% a choice. In other words, that everybody is in fact in control of themselves at all times and choosing, to do what they do to themselves. Now, I agree that with me quitting drinking, I quit drinking because I eventually chose to do that. But there were also mitigating circumstances in play that enabled me to do that with a little bit more ease. I know that if I'd been surrounded by some of the toxic people in my life, or I'd been surrounded by those, AA people, or if I'd been surrounded by my own family, I think the chances of me actually getting off the alcohol would have been rather poor because I could go into a long, detailed talk about that, but it wouldn't have been optimum. I might could have done it, but when your whole entire life circumstances look very, very hopeless, and when the people around you kind of feed on that hopelessness and they kind of want to remind you over and over again, about how worthless you are and how you're not going to make it. And that actually does alter your viewpoint. It alters the way you look at things. It alters the way you cope with things. And really and truly, when I was so caught up in my addiction the way I was, I mean, that was the one guarantee I always had. I could always go get me a drink. And even if it was a momentary fix, it would still temporarily fix what was mentally going on with me. And so, I got lucky, I guess you could say, in one sense, that I was separated from a lot of from people in general, which was actually a perfect thing. It was actually kind of a scary place to be at the time because I didn't have nobody to turn to. I didn't have nobody to call. I had no one for. I mean, I was. It was kind of an experience where you're truly alone, and you don't have an AA to get you out of it. You don't have any kind of treatment centers to get you out of it. You don't have no friends to walk with you through it. And that turned out to be really a great thing for me. I'm not recommending everybody go out and become what AA calls a low bottom drunk, which is what I was. I mean, I was a heavy alcohol abuser, but I don't recommend you go out and end up in total loss where you don't have anything or anyone in terms of anyone around you. But at the same time, it was really good for me because it was kind of just me and myself, and it was kind of almost like this realization that I came to, and that there was nobody going to help me, nobody was going to pull me out of it, that it was just going to be me and me alone that was going to pull me out of it. And got sinus crap going on. But anyway, in terms of it being either a choice or a disease, I said it's not a disease from my perspective and from the perspective of many others. In fact, I've got an article here in front of me that I was going to use for some key points, but at this point, I'm just kind of giving my own experiences with it. If it was totally a choice and it had nothing to do, like an actual choice that you just choose to do, nobody would ever drink themselves into the state that I drank myself in, and nobody would, put needles in their arms until they were living on the streets and sharing them. I mean, nobody would actually willfully get up in the morning and say, I'm going to abuse a substance until it puts me into that horrifying position in life. But at the same token, simply because there are physical and mental reasons for what makes people go all the way out like that, or fall all the way to the bottom, or just become addicted in general, that doesn't automatically prove that AA is right and that you're powerless because you've turned your back on some higher power or some God, and that you need moral inventories and amendments and pseudo-religious bullshit either. It doesn't make them right. It's a bit of a false dichotomy, in my opinion, to say it's either absolutely 100% a choice or it's absolutely 100% an addiction. You're kind of cutting out all the mitigating factors that could be taking place in between. And plus, you're kind of making a huge leap and a huge judgment call for everybody out there. I mean, I know when my own alcohol consumption started turning against me, or when it became more of a need, a necessity, versus the choice I had, for a long time when I was a younger guy, on the weekends, or after work even, it was a choice to be able to stop by the bar and have a few, or get a little too tight on the weekends, even drink in the morning on the weekend. On the weekends, I used to actually think it was kind of romantic to wake up at, say, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning and start drinking some liquor to kind of get the day going. I mean, I never had any stigma attached to that for some reason. I just didn't. I mean, it was something that I actually really rather enjoyed about it in the early days, because I wasn't in a physically dependent state. I mean, I'd get up in the morning and I'd put some music on, and I'd do that, and the hangover would be gone, and I was in a better mood for the rest of the day. I didn't end up completely intoxicated like I did later on down the line with it. But mentally, I remember looking over what my life was like when it became something that I had to have, or it became a go-to thing for everything. I remember all the internal pressures that was going on in my head. I remember everything that was happening outside. I'm going to cough myself to death with these sinuses before I even finish this thing. Just joking. But I can remember really plainly the state of mind I was in, and it was I was hopeless. Not hopeless in terms of my life was falling apart or anything like that in the early days. It was just mentally I was hopeless. Mentally, I felt kind of trapped by my circumstances. I didn't intend, for instance, to get stuck in a printing factory for a number of years, and I had got to a place, I remember, where, for early 2000s or late 1990s, I was making $22 an hour. You can imagine how much money that was. And mentally, I remember at the time, because I hated the place, I literally wanted to blow my brains out before I went in there every morning. It had gotten so awful. But I was constantly feeling like, I can't quit. I can't stop doing this because there's no place else I could go that's going to pay me this amount of money. There's no place. I don't have any skills outside of running freaking printing presses. And I drove a cab at one time. I worked in retail one time. I did odd and end construction, but I didn't have an actual set of anything skill-wise that could have got me anywhere other than where I was. And I remember that was a big part of it. And I remember the relationship I was involved in and had been involved in for a number of years at that time. It wasn't just my drinking, looking back on it. People change. really, and they like for in my situation, I wasn't the same person I was when I was, barely 20, to sound sappy, in love. And that person wasn't the same either, several years later. I mean, we had grown apart. We didn't understand each other, know each other. There was several other things going on with me, but I just remember the one nagging mental thing that was going on with me all the time was there's no way out of this. There's no way out of my life. There's no way out of these mortgages. There's no way out of these fucking bills. There's no way out was the underlying thing that covered it all. I didn't start out drinking myself into dependency, but it became something I started needing to have. I mean, I remember I went from being someone that, pretty much could get through a work day to being someone who was looking at that clock and thinking, I got to get the fuck out of here and get me a drink before I go freaking mad or blow my head off. And I remember, when I started crossing lines here and there, I was drinking, on the job. I was drinking on breaks, and and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I mean, of course, you flash forward many, many years later, and it was really, really bad. But if you're going to look at all of that, I mean, my point is when I look at that in retrospect, a lot of that had to do with what was going on with me mentally. Am I blaming everybody for that? Am I saying, if the factory hadn't happened, or if the relationship hadn't fallen completely apart, or if this hadn't, then I wouldn't have done it? I'm not saying that per se. I'm saying that that was still a mitigating factor in the choices I made at the time. Now, wherever it ended up, I don't think I had very little choice over it, because when you become physically dependent on something, I'm sure anybody who's ever really been down there on the bottom with the drinking, or really been down there on the bottom with, say, shooting up, can tell you when you're too physically sick to function without it, then you no longer have a choice at all. The only thing that you got going for you is to try to keep from getting sick, to try to keep from going into withdrawals, to try to keep from going into shock. And so on that level, would I say it's all a choice? Did I choose my own path of destruction to end up where I ended up? The best, because I've worried about that before at night. I've worried about that. I worry about it now from time to time. Something will cross my mind. I'll be like, you just fucked that up in your life because you were drunk. You just fucked that up in your life because you were a drunk. You just went and fucked that up in your life because you was a drunk. And, I know that after getting the help I needed through therapy and then getting on the right medications, and being able to kind of be objective about the past today, it doesn't take away, any regrets. It doesn't take away, those kinds of things, those nagging 3 a.m. in the morning thoughts when you wake up and you can't sleep, and all of a sudden shit from your past starts coming out at you at all corners, and you start thinking, oh God, I'm laying awake in terror at my own existence here. I mean, it doesn't totally take that away, but I think with the coping mechanisms I had at the time, with the background I came from, with the people that I was surrounded by, it's easy to slip into something like that. Are you 100% choosing what you do? Or, when it comes to choices in general, most choices in our lives, even very basic ones like whether to pick up this Coke or not, goes through a zillion different processes in your brain before you ultimately make a decision. So I wouldn't go so far as to say, it's 100% a choice. I mean, people drink and people get addicted for a wide variety of reasons. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's the one thing that I despise about AA. AA is assuming that because it's a disease, their definition of a disease, that at some point in your life, you fail to grow spiritually, or at some point in your life, you stopped believing in God, or at some point in your life, you did this and you did that, and that's why you became an alcoholic, or because you were selfish and self-centered, some dumb shit like that. And simply because of whatever circumstances, and I'm sure anybody watching this has their own reasons and their own circumstances and their own past history for why their life turned out the way it did with their addictions, it doesn't automatically mean that we're diseased, powerless, and in need of some spiritual cure. In my case, it was simply a matter of getting on the right medication, and there were things that had haunted me my whole life, like with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was the stereotypical obsessive compulsive disorder, checking locks. I'd have to shower 2 and 3 times a day. I have to wash my hands until they were raw all the time. Phobia about germs and all that. That plagued me to the point that I was crippled when I was a teenager almost by it. And so I do think that some things that are in your mental faculties or some things that are about you or even your situation in life and everything else, there's a zillion mitigating circumstances that make you choose the path to your own destruction. And the thing that with the choice thing, I know there's a lot of people who have a hard ass, tough love approach to everybody who gets addicted and says, well, you chose to do this to yourself. That's not as quite easily dismissed as a lot of people make it out to be, in my opinion. Now, this article, like for this guy, I think I'm saying his name right. His name is Jeffrey Shaler. He wrote a book about addiction is the choice, where he says, is a pattern of consumption causes a disease, even if it's foolish or self-destructive, but is it something altogether distinct and separate? Is the pattern of actual consumption of a drug or alcohol a disease scientifically? The contention that addiction is a disease is completely unsupported by anything in science. Addiction is a behavior, and thus clearly intended by the individual person. This has been corroborated by patient research for years. I have to agree there in one way. And he mentions here that a lot of people who are, drug addicts or people who are hopelessly addicted to alcohol, that they have the ability to even monitor their rate of consumption from time to time, that they don't drink all the alcohol they can every time they pick it up, that they plan ahead, that they even know how to nurse themselves back from binges. Uh, it's not saying that they're completely in control of what they're doing, he's saying. It's just that there's no evidence that a person cannot successfully moderate when they need to or quit when they need to. They rationally respond to incentives devised by hospital researchers. Again, the evidence supporting this has actually been looked at in the scientific community for a number of years, which is interesting to me because if it's been looked at in the scientific community for a number of years, why are we still pushing an outdated model on people? I have to agree with him there on some things because, when it comes to, even with my low bottoms, like if I had to function somewhat during the day, like if I had to be at work, for example, and there were times that when I would wake up with just violent hangovers, there was a part of me that would say, okay, I know I can drink a pint of vodka and I can be drunk enough that the hangover won't be there, but I can be fully functional. I'll walk around like a normal person just as long as you don't get too close to me and, pick up all the alcohol fumes around me. When I actually quit drinking the last go around, which has been, a while back, yeah, it was a tapering off situation. I was no way I could quit cold turkey with what had been going on with me. I had to taper. So in some way, he is correct that under the right circumstances, you can actually moderate even when you're in a hopeless state. Uh, but one thing he was saying, he wrote a book about it. It's called Addiction is a Choice. And it's saying a lot of people in the addiction field actually knows that an addiction, can't talk tonight, is a choice and not a disease. But yet they were saying that he was pushing open a door which should have been shut decades ago. Not sure what he means by that. But many addiction specialists in Britain claim that there's no need for this book to be argued over there. But then he accurately points out in the United States we're not making much progress. In the face of all reason and rational evidence, why are people still pushing the disease model as the best explanation for addiction? I know I can say this. I didn't expect to take up this much time talking. Um, he's saying something here about the conception of the relationship between mind body. There's several competing theories about that relation, and then he goes on into that some more. which I'm not going to have time to cover unless I want to talk for another 10 or 15 minutes. But I was trying to see if I could find a key point here with what he's saying. Well, he does point out there's no dispute that abuse of various substances do cause physiological changes with people who ingest them for a long period of time. They change with repeated dosage, even that these changes can even be correlated with subjective mental states like reward and enjoyment. Now, he says this is in principle because some of the people run away from those supposed correlations. I'll say this: when I believed that I had a disease, when I believed I was powerless, when I believed that there was, I had to do this whole surrender thing, I know it made my life far, far worse because there's nothing quite as hopeless as being told you have this incurable disease and you have to do this bullshit for the rest of your life, and you can never hope to ever take credit for evolving any better than what you than what you currently are, which is this worthless alcoholic who's immoral and driven by selfishness and all of that. I think that led to more of my relapses more than anything else. I mean, this is freaking hopeless. I mean, and I'm gonna die anyway because this shit doesn't jive with me. It was an interesting point that I think I ought to make before I stop this one for this week, is that it was funny when I was, like I said at the beginning of this video, when I was all by myself and I was all alone out there and I had nobody to turn to and it was just me and myself. It was interesting how I overcame the problem of addiction with the liquor. When I knew it was just me by myself and I didn't have no one to turn to, and I was going to have to do this. Or I made a decision to do that. I could have kept probably right on drinking for a little while, but it was just I was so burned out on the whole thing and so miserable. But it's funny how I was able to successfully quit and how I've successfully been able to stay quit ever since I was in a position where I wasn't leaning on some religious organization like AA or dependent upon other people or dependent upon some higher power at the time to solve my problems for me. It's one thing I go back to all the time when people want to talk about, if you leave AA, you're going to get drunk and die. It was funny when I left AA. That's when I stopped getting drunk. Anyway, that probably went all over the place with that one, but talked way longer than I meant to. But hopefully, I'll be able to do these a little bit more frequently. Anyway, until next.